This is the Michigan assembly plant in the 1990s. Right now, you're watching the body welding of a Ford Bronco and a Ford F-Series. This Wayne plant also produced the Ford Expedition and Ranger in the 1990s. 40 years ago, the share of Ford vehicles in the United States was significantly higher than it is today. Even so, Ford is the third largest car manufacturer in the U.S. In the old days when the common man could actually afford a new vehicle, in those days, real Americans were in charge of the production process, and there were almost no robots working on the assembly line. You may remember that these Ford cars had vinyl floors, bench seats, and manual windows. Now the bodywork has been sanded, polished, and prepared for painting. Painting of the bodywork was often carried out with almost no respiratory protection. Automated painting using robotic arms has only been introduced on a large scale in modernized Ford factories in recent decades. You are now watching the engine being assembled into the chassis subframe. The car body and chassis were assembled on separate assembly lines. Once the chassis was ready, including the engine and wheels, it was transported as one unit to the main assembly line, where it was joined to the bodywork. This process of joining the body to the chassis is still known today as the marriage. As you can see right now, back in the 1990s, Ford put its logo all over the back of the car. This trend is now re-emerging with more car companies in recent years. On the main assembly line in Michigan, factory workers are now putting the finishing touches on the car's interior. They're gradually assembling the seats, steering wheel, lights, mirrors, and other important parts. In the 1990s, approximately 35,000 Ford Broncos were produced per year. From 1987 to 1991, the fourth generation Ford Bronco was produced at this plant. The 1990s began the decade in a recession, which resulted in weak auto sales and operating losses. While the American automakers were investing in or buying foreign competitors, the foreign automakers continued to establish more production facilities in the United States. This is how final output quality control was done on the Ford F-Series in the 1990s. Even today, this type of vehicle is the most sold vehicle in the entire United States. The final quality of each car was supervised by a senior member of the inspection department. This gray-haired, experienced factory worker personally inspected each car and marked its quality on the checklist. One of the last steps before starting the car was to stick on the chrome emblems and logos. These emblems have often lasted on these cars to this day. At the time, this plant was called the Michigan Truck Plant. First in quality, first in pride to this day. According to Ford, the discontinuation of the Ford Bronco model line was not related to the stigma caused by the O.J. Simpson police chase, because sales of the model line were already declining prior to that incident. This red Ford F-150 was one of the most popular cars due to its durability. For 1994, the Bronco became powered solely by V8 engines, as the 4.9-liter inline-six was withdrawn from the model line. At the time of this film, Ford was producing more than 4 million cars a year and offered a wide range of colors and trims. The bodywork has always been painted in several layers. The first stage was immersion in an anti-corrosive fluid. This was followed by sealing the joints and moving the bodywork to the paint shop. These Ford cars consisted of 17,000 parts. Today, modern cars have an average of over 30,000 parts. This comparison shows how much more complex cars have become over the decades. This modernized assembly plant in Michigan already had an automated paint shop in the late 1990s. The car bodies are moved around the assembly line by a slow-moving belt. Gradually, more and more parts are added to the body. Currently, this Michigan factory employs 5,600 hourly employees and 400 salary employees. In 1913, Henry Ford introduced the assembly line to help reduce the cost of the already popular Model T. Instead of working on a variety of tasks to build one car, each worker remained in the same spot and performed one task for his entire shift. You can see this process in practice in this video. Please let me know in the comments section how much you like the Ford cars of the 1990s. Assembly of the front dashboard in one piece using the manipulator arm is the same as in today's car factories. A strong adhesive is applied to the edge of the window, and then two workers at the factory glue the window to the body frame. For better efficiency, the entire engine, including the gearbox, is assembled in a separate part of the factory. The finished engine is then delivered to the main assembly line at a predetermined time. The whole process of assembling a car is actually a huge jigsaw puzzle. Assembly line workers have always had a lot of freedom in the United States. They only have to wear safety glasses and gloves. Last year, Ford sold 13% of all cars in the United States, making it the third largest automaker behind Toyota and General Motors. In 2024, Ford sold 2.1 million vehicles, which is 150,000 more than in 2023. But in 2019, this car manufacturer sold 2.4 million vehicles in the United States. Ford issued a statement saying it appreciates the effort to exempt automakers from the 25% tariffs on imports from Canada and Mexico. Ford has invested billions in American workers and building factories right here in the United States. We'll see how the whole situation develops. Let me know in the comments section what you think about the tariffs. After final assembly, the car was taken to the dyno testing. Dynamometer is a device for simultaneously measuring the torque and rotational speed of an engine so that its instantaneous power may be calculated and usually displayed by the dynamometer itself as kilowatts. After assembly and quality control, the cars were parked in giant parking lots next to the factory and then distributed by train or truck to the dealerships. Car companies have always been pioneers in the introduction of new technologies and, in the early 21st century, in the introduction of computers. Ford cars were taken for chassis and suspension testing in the late 1990s. Here, the car's ability to withstand off-road conditions was tested. Every car from this Michigan factory has been through this off-road circuit. This is the beginning of the General Motors Norwood assembly plant in the 1960s. In the old days, when people were still a valuable part of the production process, it was a time when people took pride in their work and pride in every car they made. These Chevrolets consisted of 14,000 parts. Today, modern cars average more than 30,000 parts. This comparison shows how much more complex cars have become over the decades. At the time of this documentary, Chevrolet was producing more than 1.6 million vehicles a year and offered a wide range of colors and trims. In those days, GM was the largest car company in the world. General Motors included Buick, Cadillac, Pontiac, and Oldsmobile. This American multinational automobile company continues to hold the top spot in sales in the United States. By total sales, it has continuously been the largest automaker in the United States, and was the largest in the world for 77 years before losing the top spot to Toyota in 2008. Last year, 16 million vehicles were sold in the US, 17% of which were built in General Motors factories. For the full-size Chevrolet alone, there were 5 engines, 5 transmissions, 7 body styles, and 3 trim levels, 14 exterior colors, dozens of interior fabrics, and an almost endless list of luxury and performance options. This machine automatically checked dimensions to within 10,000ths of an inch. Even pieces that were deliberately too small were fed into the machine to test its efficiency. This is a good example of how much automobile factories have moved on. The assembly line was all about timing, teamwork, and organization. Today it's similar, but robotics play a big role, and the whole production process is computer-controlled. Right now you're watching the production 4.6-liter V8 turbo fire engine. Over 9,000 employees worked at this Norwood assembly plant in Ohio. Now, the completed car bodywork has moved on to the paintwork. Note that at that time, the painters spraying the paint did not have protective masks. Production began here in 1923 and closed completely in 1987. This General Motors plant also produced the Chevrolet Biscayne, Caprice, Camaro, Pontiac Firebird, and Buick Apollo. In car manufacturing jargon, marriage is the moment when the body and chassis are joined. It's called that because the engine, transmission, drive shafts and axles, fuel tank, and various other elements are not fitted to the car individually, but all at once. The wheels were mounted on the chassis before the body was attached to the chassis. In the 1960s, there were thousands of different color combinations to choose from. Today, car companies usually offer only a few color combinations, the reason being, of course, lower production costs. There were many more workers on the main production line then than today. These Chevrolet cars were assembled from individual parts from subcontractors. Even back then, women worked in car factories in the United States. However, this was only 10% of the total workforce compared to 25% today. After the first engine start, the finished Chevrolet Impala was taken to the test dyno. Here, the engine performance and handling were tested from the driver's position. Now the quality inspector has taken the finished Chevrolet for waterproofing testing. A heavy shower was turned on the car, and not a drop of water was allowed to enter the interior of the car. In 1963, 1 out of every 10 cars sold in the United States was a Chevrolet. During the 1960s and early 1970s, the standard Chevrolet, particularly the deluxe Chevrolet Impala series, became one of the United States' best-selling lines of automobiles in history. In just 1 year, 1960, an incredible 600,000 Chevrolet cars were produced. In 1962, Chevrolet primarily produced the C10, Biscayne, and Bel Air. The 60s were a great time for the automotive industry. The famous Volkswagen Transporter was also produced, which was popular with the younger generations. During this period, European and American car companies were very competitive with each other. The tariffs introduced by all countries were very much entering into their competition. Right now, for example, you're looking at the Ford plant in Cologne, Germany. Although in the United States Ford was making big pickup trucks, in Europe they relied on smaller, more fuel-efficient cars. Car companies have always had to adapt to specific markets and needs, and have developed different car models. Even in those days, there was a big fight for the customer. Every car manufacturing process begins with the creation of doors, hoods, and other body parts from these large steel plates. One car can use more than a dozen types of steel plates. You are now looking at the pressing machine. Steel plates are fed into the cutting machine and punched into different shapes and sizes. So welcome inside the Mercedes-Benz factory. This is where the luxurious Mercedes W116 was manufactured in the 1970s. This series was the flagship luxury sedan produced between 1972 and 1980. It was the first model to be officially classified as a Mercedes S-Class. In total, almost 500,000 Mercedes cars of this model were produced. In the late 1970s, this Mercedes sold for $38,000. North America was a key market for the Mercedes-Benz W116. The 300 SD, the world's first passenger car with a turbocharged diesel engine, was launched in the United States and Canada in 1978. The S-Class model with the turbo diesel engine was exclusive to the North American and Japanese markets until 1991. In 1977, the self-leveling rear suspension system was offered for $450 SEL as an extra cost option outside the North American market. Right now, you are watching footage from inside the Sindelfingen factory in Germany. This is also where the Mercedes-Benz S-Class is produced today. Over 300,000 cars are currently produced here every year. Today, over 33,000 workers are employed in this factory, of which nearly 22,000 are employed directly on the assembly line. In the 1970s, a similar number worked here thanks to less robotization. This model became the first production car to use the electronic multi-channel anti-lock braking system, ABS, as an option from 1978. Back in the 1970s, body welding was already largely automated by robotic hands. It should be mentioned that this German Mercedes factory was one of the most modern in the world at the time. After welding the bodywork, workers must manually sand down the defective parts. They used a hand grinder to do this. First, the floor, sides, and ceiling are assembled, and as many as 1,000 places are welded. Welding is performed with high precision because it greatly affects the car's stability. Currently, 15% of all Mercedes-Benz vehicles are produced at the Sindelfingen plant. This factory was founded in 1915 and is the largest production plant of the Daimler Group. This first S-Class model incorporates a wide range of Mercedes-Benz safety innovations, such as crumple zones at the front and rear. Now the bodywork is hung in the bracket, and on rails in the ceiling, it is completely immersed in anti-corrosion fluid. This prevents the car from corroding. After soaking in a bath of liquid, the body is dried and the next stage of painting is continued. Now the worker manually sprays a protective sealant on the selected areas and joints. The bodywork is raised up for this activity to allow easy access from below. This is the reason why such a large number of these cars are still running today, more than 40 years after they were built. The last part in the paint shop is spraying the final top coat on the bodywork. In the 1970s, white, black, or gold was the popular color, but there were dozens of different colors to choose from. Another improvement was the fuel tank, which was no longer located at the rear of the car, but was placed above the rear axle for better protection. This is how the tachometer and front dashboard wiring was tested. As in other factories, the front dashboard was always made in one piece and then just slid into the car and installed on the main assembly line. The W116 was the first Mercedes-Benz model to be equipped with high-drop pneumatic suspension. For greater reliability, the hydraulic pump was driven by a timing chain instead of a rubber belt. Mercedes-Benz used hard rubber shock absorbers as temporary dampers in case of hydraulic failure. In every car factory in the past, as today, a great deal of attention was paid to order. Cleaning machines run across the entire factory floor and keep not only the floor clean. You are now watching the start of the main assembly line. As you can see, both men and women worked here. Gradually, more and more parts are added to the bodywork. The wiring and other components were connected by human workers only, without the help of robots. The W116 featured a more stable passenger safety bodywork with a reinforced roof frame structure. High-strength roof and door pillars, together with additional reinforced zones, provided increased protection for the vehicle's occupants. At the time this model was introduced, it was the best car in this category. In the 70s, this car had a futuristic interior full of novelties and luxurious equipment. Now the worker can easily mount the front dashboard. The rectangular headlamps were typical of this historic Mercedes and gave the car an original and easy-to-remember look. After the installation was completed, each worker checked that everything was done correctly and that everything was working as it should. The cars move across the entire car factory on a moving belt, and gradually seats, steering wheel, interior trim, and other components are assembled into the car. The manufacturing process resembles a giant jigsaw puzzle. As many as 1,000 parts are installed in a line more than half a mile long. During the assembly process, parts are installed based on the production instruction sheet attached to the vehicle. There were a large number of chrome features on this Mercedes, including the 280 SE badge. The W116 was presented in September 1972. The model range initially included two versions of the M110 engine, the 280S and the 280SE, using Bosch D-Jetronic injection. Plus the 350 SE powered by the M116 engine, V8 with 3,499 cubic centimeter displacement. After the 1973 oil crisis, a long wheelbase 280S EL was added to the model range. At the same time as the passenger cabin was being assembled, the chassis and engine were being prepared in another part of the factory. The 4.5-liter models were available with 3-speed automatic gearboxes only, while the models with smaller 3.5-liter V8 engine could be ordered with a 4-speed manual gearbox. The door cards had the velour, or leather inserts. The production process of assembling the engine and gearbox was carried out separately, similar to today's Mercedes factory. The workers here specialized in working with small engines. The W116 engine was one of the best you could buy in the 1970s. The 450 SE was named the European Car of the Year in 1974. The W116 was succeeded by the W126 S-Class in 1979. The W116 was sold throughout Europe, the Americas, Asia, the Middle East, Africa, and Australia. Before the mid-1990s, Mercedes-Benz had a very strong reputation for quality and durability. Mercedes-Benz's passenger cars were considered as tanks or indestructible by owners who had their own Mercedes for a very long period. ESP, brake assist, and many other types of safety equipment were all developed, tested, and implemented into passenger cars. First, by Mercedes-Benz. Mercedes-Benz has licensed some of its innovations for use by competitors. Here you can see how the shock absorbers were assembled. In 1978, a series of engine upgrades restored original performance levels with new fuel injection systems. At the end of the assembly line, just before startup, a strict quality control was still in progress. Due to the high price of the cars, great emphasis was placed on the final quality. The wheels and all the doors were the last to be fitted to the cars. Now the inspection officer will test all lights, wipers, horn, and other functionality from the driver's position. These Mercedes-Benz cars had one of the most iconic and popular features: small special headlight wipers. The Sindelfingen plant is the third largest car manufacturing plant in Germany, after the Volkswagen plant in Wolfsburg and the Audi plant in Ingolstadt. One of the last tests after the car was completed was a dyno test. This is where the car is pushed to top speed, and the engine performance and correct shifting of the manual gearbox were tested. Transmission was either 4 and 5 speed in manual, or 3 and 4 speed in automatic. The Mercedes S-Class W116 was a sportier car, slightly more agile and less boat-like. The interior design with its wood paneling still makes a very pleasant impression today. The main assembly line was staffed mainly by Germans and some from other countries. However, compared to the automobile factory where the Trabant was built, for example, it was a completely different world. These cars occasionally appeared in the countries of Eastern Communist Europe. However, it was not possible to buy this car on the regular market here. The typically dominant Mercedes logo on the top of the front grille is still one of the most recognizable symbols today. If the car passed all the tests, it was stamped with a quality sticker and then loaded onto trucks or trains and shipped all over Western Europe. The main market was, of course, Germany. The main assembly line in this German car factory was staffed mostly by men of German origin. By contrast, the Trabant car plant in East Germany was staffed mainly by people from abroad. Working in a Mercedes factory was a very prestigious occupation at the time, and the workers were well paid. People didn't buy this Mercedes model for 2 or 3 years, but for life. And it was with a focus on longevity that this car was invented and then assembled. Apart from the car itself, the attitude of Mercedes dealerships in the 1970s was also very good. The customer came first, and it was possible to properly test drive the car before buying it. Now you're watching authentic historical footage of the Volkswagen Beetle being built in a factory in Mexico. This factory produced Volkswagen cars mainly for export to the United States. After its discontinuation in Germany, production of the Volkswagen Beetle continued in Australia, Mexico, and Nigeria. Production of the Volkswagen Beetle began at this Puebla plant in Mexico in July 2003. And this is how Beetle production always started, in a department called the press shop. Its production span of 65 years is the longest of any single generation of automobile, and its total production of over 23 million is the most of any car of a single platform. Now, the entire body of the typical Beetle has been welded in the welding shop. Then sealer is applied to steel plate joints. This is a very important part before painting the car as it prevents water leakage. It also prevents rusting of the car and improves soundproofing. Next, the car body is prepared for the middle coat. While it's not seen, it's the care taken for this middle coat that helps achieve a beautiful future color. The next step is the top coating process. While robots are mainly used to apply paint evenly on large surfaces, humans play a role in small and important areas requiring judgment and skill. Finally, a clear coat is sprayed on to give the whole car a beautiful shine. Each car is painted one by one with its designated color. The conventional method to apply paint is through aerodynamic force, which turns the paint into fine particles to be sprayed onto the car body. While the design of the Beetle changed little over its lifespan, Volkswagen implemented over 78,000 incremental updates. Typically subtle, these alterations usually involved minor updates to the exterior, interior, colors, and lighting. To celebrate the occasion, Volkswagen marketed a series of 3,000 Beetles as final edition. Volkswagen's old classic car logo has been stuck on the Beetle's bonnet, as you can see right now. These two Mexican employees glued the front window and then secured it by gently banging it. More noteworthy changes have comprised new engines, models, and systems, such as updated dashboards and hydraulic braking. Volkswagen Beetle, officially called the Volkswagen Type 1, was a small family car produced by the German company Volkswagen from 1938 to 2003. Over its 65-year tenure, Volkswagen produced this car in numerous locations worldwide. Production of the Beetle was possible through agreements with companies like Chrysler in Mexico and the Studebaker-Packard Corporation, which assembled cars imported in complete knockdown form. The Beetle was introduced to the Mexican market in 1954 and began official production 10 years later. One of the most iconic cars in automotive history, the Beetle is noted for its distinctive shape. In the US, the Beetle became popular thanks to a great advertising campaign called Think Small. Now you can see that at the end of the production line, a spare wheel was also inserted into the car. The Beetle had it placed in the front. In this Mexican factory, workers wore white work suits. On the main assembly line, you can now see all the windows, front bumper, and other parts of the car being assembled. Once the entire assembly was completed, the cars proceeded to the quality control station. Here, workers inspected each car and polished the hood. The good old Volkswagen Beetle is now ready for its first engine start. All the cars produced were loaded onto a ferry at one point and transported to a port off the coast of the United States. It takes several days to transport the vehicles, park them, and secure them inside the huge ferry. One car after another, the capacity of the ferry is several thousand vehicles. This is how the famous Trabants were assembled in the German Zwickau factory. You can see for yourself right now how funny the quality control is. Workers back then used brute force to align the gaps between the body and the doors. Sachsenring car manufacturer was founded in 1957 and employed approximately 3,000 people. The production process of Trabant started here, in the press shop. Sachsenring was one of the few manufacturers of vehicles in East Germany, its best-known product being the Trabant, produced between 1957 and 1991. The employees in this Zwickau factory were mostly East Germans. However, other nationalities also worked there. And in 1989, a total of over 150,000 Trabants were produced in a single year. Manufactured by a state monopoly, a Trabant took about 10 years to acquire. The Trabant's build quality was poor, and it was loud, slow, and poorly designed. So-called a spark plug with a roof, 3.1 million Trabants were produced. The most famous was the Trabant 601, whose production you are currently watching, which was produced between 1964 and 1990. It featured detachable Duraplast body panels on a galvanized steel unibody chassis, front-wheel drive, a transverse two-stroke engine, and independent suspension. Because this 1950s design remained largely unchanged until the introduction of the last model, the Trabant 1.1 in 1990, the Trabant became symbolic of the former East Germany's stagnant economy and the collapse of the Eastern Bloc in general. At the time, the so-called classic concept with front engine and rear-wheel drive was common, and the all-rear concept was beginning to proliferate, which was taken up in the 1960s by, for example, Skoda. Due to the difficulty of molding the Duraplast, the cars were made by hand, and literally every car was an original. Trabants may have been small, but they were quite demanding to produce. The most popular model, the Trabant 601, had the same engine and wheelbase as the previous 600. There are still some 33,000 Trabants roaming the streets of Germany today. Women also worked in this vehicle factory, but only about 15% of all employees. Quite revolutionary was the all-in-front concept. The transversely mounted engine was in front of the front axle, which it drove. Over the 27 years of 601 Trabants, many subversions have been created. Working conditions in the Zwickau factories were very bad and unhealthy. Unlike the pre-war twin-cylinder engines, the Trabant engines were air-cooled, initially providing 17 horsepower, and later on the Type 601, after modernization 19 kilowatts. Less than 22,000 of the P50, also known as the Trabant 500, were built over 5 years of production. The Trabant 601's appearance has changed slightly, and the length and width of the body has increased. The basic type was a 2-door limousine. The alternative was a 3-door coupe. In richer equipment versions, the cars were enriched with fog lights or a speedometer. In addition, from 1966, an off-road version with outdoors and with a canvas roof was produced for the East German Armed Forces. After the start of serial production of the 601, the new Trabant 602 was developed in Zwickau. The car was to be larger. The base was not to be a limousine but a hatchback, and more powerful engines were to be used. The concept of the hatchback was further developed by the chief designer in the 603 prototype, which is sometimes considered the model for the aforementioned Volkswagen Golf. However, the development of both the 602 and 603 was eventually halted due to instructions from the management. Because the Trabant did not have a fuel pump, its fuel tank was equipped with above the engine, so the fuel entered the carburetor by gravity, increasing the risk of fire and frontal accidents. What is your opinion of the Trabant compared to American cars of the same era? Please write me in the comment section. After production was completed, a series of performance tests were carried out, including driving tests on the circuit next to the production factory. Earlier models had no fuel gauge, and a dipstick was inserted into the tank to determine how much fuel remained. The 1980s model had no tachometer, no indicator for either the headlights or turn signals, no fuel gauge, no rear seat belts, no external fuel door. In contrast, the West German Volkswagen Beetle received a number of updates over a similar period. Its inefficient, labor-intensive production line had only survived thanks to government subsidies. This model of Trabant also had an overrunning clutch when running in fourth gear. With change to 12 volts in 1984, options as hazard flashers and rear window heater became available. When a successor, the Trabant 1.1 was eventually developed, it received minimal external differences. The only exterior changes were a new radiator grille, bumpers, taillights, a more square bonnet. The interior was subject to many changes. The Zwickau factory in Mosel, where the Trabant was manufactured, was sold to Volkswagen. The rest of the company became Sachsenring. Volkswagen redeveloped the Zwickau factory into a center for engine production. It also produces some Volkswagen Golfs and Passats. Right now you are watching the Trabant bodywork being prepared for painting in the automated painting line. Every day this factory produces dozens of finished Trabants, but even that wasn't enough to keep up with the huge demand. As you can see, even back then, robotic arms were being introduced inside factories to spray individual body parts. The robotization of car factories has been increasing especially since the late 1980s. The painted bodywork was then dried and proceeded to storage. From the main warehouse, the bodywork was then moved to the assembly line at a predetermined time. It should be noted that the quality of the bodies was then orders of magnitude lower than today's cars. Nevertheless, the painters had to spray some areas personally. The finished bodywork was loaded using forklift truck and transported to the main assembly line. In order to allow the automaker's employees to assemble the lower parts of the car well, the car rotated on its axis. Zwickau opted for a Duroplast body, mainly because East Germany was facing a steel shortage in the 1950s. In comparative crash tests in the early 1990s, on the other hand, it fared better than some metal-bodied cars. You are now looking at the wiring between the lights, engine, and dashboard. At this point, the main assembly of the entire car takes place. It took 21 seconds to accelerate from 0 to its top speed of 62 miles per hour. And known for its dull color scheme and cramped, uncomfortable ride, the Trabant is an object of ridicule for many Germans and is regarded as symbolic of the fall of the Eastern Bloc. The Trabant excelled in its ability to pollute the environment. The exhaust fumes were terrible. The Trabant had a steel frame with the roof, boot lid, bonnet, wings, and doors made of Duroplast. Trabant is made of Duroplast, which is a composite thermosetting resin plastic. The material was durable, and the average lifespan of a Trabant was 28 years. Older models have been sought by collectors in the United States due to their low cost and fewer restrictions on the importation of antique cars. Trabant has also won fans among tuning and rally enthusiasts. The cars are often referred to as Trabi or Trabi. The car bodies of the Trabants were transported between the factories using trucks. The whole factory was so big, there was no other way to do it. Now you can see how the upper layers were added to the Duroplast bodywork. The waiting time depended on their proximity to Berlin, the capital. The second-hand price on the open market was more than double that. The workstation where the Duroplast was produced was very unhealthy. Employees often breathed hazardous substances at work. The problem with these cars was the low quality of the material from which they were made, as well as the poorly designed parameters. However, the engines were relatively durable and lasted for decades with great durability. Each car was equipped with a checklist where employees recorded the assembly performed. Please let me know in the comments section what you think of German Trabants. Now the bodywork is being sealed in preparation for the anti-corrosion bath. You're now watching the entire bodywork being dipped in corrosion protection. Hundreds of individual steps had to be taken to produce a single Trabant. Each worker was trained in one part of the production chain. This employee inspects the bodywork and prepares it for the next stage of production. Trabant car bodies moved across the factory on sliding rails, much like in today's factories. Employees are now assembling the doors, bonnet, and completing the final bodywork. There was never a design change. Of course, this is a negative thing, but it has contributed to the cult of this vehicle, as the typical look has not changed at all over the decades. Duroplast was an advanced material for its time, a recycled resin that used fiber reinforcement such as cotton. It provided a rust-free shell for the Trabant that was barely altered in the 30 years. The shifts in this factory were long and the pay was poor. The workers had no protective equipment or clothing. They came in the same clothes they wore on the street or in their homes. You are now watching a close-knit team of workers on the main assembly line. Their job was to connect the chassis frame to the engine and body of the vehicle. They then wired up all the parts of the vehicle. Now you can see how the assembly of all wheels on the Trabant 601 was carried out by a worker from Vietnam. The wheels of the Trabant were fixed on 4 classic screws, nothing complicated. Following the reunification of Germany in 1990, Sachsenring transitioned from a government-owned company under a centrally planned economy to a private corporation in a free market economy. The engine performance will now be tested in the final stage of production on the test dyno. This is what the all-new Trabant looked like immediately after production. Also, in the production of Trabant, quality control was carried out during the production process. You are now watching the finishing and polishing of the Trabant 601 bodywork. Trabant interior waterproofing testing now underway. In waterproofing testing, a worker inside the vehicle checks the waterproofing of the vehicle interior with a torch. Despite the carmaker's best efforts, these cars were often rained into, and the gaps between the doors and bodywork were very large. Thousands of East Germans drove their Trabants over the border when the wall fell, which made it a kind of automotive liberator. Employees at the Zwickau factory load hundreds of Trabant cars onto trains every day. After completion, the new cars were loaded onto trains or trucks and shipped throughout the communist countries. This is the VEB Eisenach factory in East Germany. The famous Wartburg cars were produced here. The whole production started in these furnaces where the steel parts of the engine were cast. There are still some cars in a roadworthy condition, and Wartburg owners' clubs exist throughout Europe. The first model Wartburg 311 was produced between 1956 and 1965. Some Wartburg cars are still used as rally cars today. Now the Wartburg car body connection is being completed. Tailgate and rear fenders were made of glass fiber-reinforced plastic. The Wartburg 353, known in some export markets as the Wartburg Knight, was a medium-sized family car produced by the East German car manufacturer AWE for their Wartburg brand. The Wartburg 353 was produced from 1966 to 1988, becoming the Wartburg with the longest production run. During its lifetime, it saw several changes and improvements, the most recognizable of which came in 1985 with a front facelift, a slightly different layout around the engine block, and a new carburetor. Now you can see that the painting was done as a combination of manual and machine spraying. The painted body of the Wartburg was properly polished with large brushes as in a car wash. In the pressing and welding department, these huge pressing machines were... In 1988, the new model Wartburg 1.3 therefore replaced the old model 353, featuring the reliable, though bulkier, four-stroke engine from the Volkswagen Golf. Because of its forward center of gravity and front-wheel drive, the car had typical front-wheel drive road handling, usually displaying significant understeer, especially in wet conditions. Like other Eastern Europe cars, it was known for its low price and export markets. Wartburgs were exported to most European markets in South Africa. You are now looking at the finished chassis with wheels, shock absorbers, and engine. The red chassis is now connected to the red body by means of a lowering crane. Today, 353S are customized for reaching speeds well about 125 miles per hour, whereas the original design called for critical speed of 96 miles per hour. Now, workers at the factory will glue the front and rear windows. They have no helmets or goggles. Now the new cars have been tested on the dyno. This is how the engine performance was tested. As you can see, most manufacturing processes are not much different from those of today. The last modernization of Wartburg took place in 1988 when the car got the new designation 1.3 and a four-stroke VW-designed engine with a 1.3-liter displacement. Domestically, it was used for all government transport, sometimes as a police car for Germany. However, due to the nature of the planned economy, deliveries to private owners could take 10 to 15 years. Its origins were ultimately derived from a 1938 design and powered by a two-stroke engine with only 7 major moving parts: 3 pistons, 3 connecting rods, and a crankshaft. This led to a common aphorism among Wartburg owners, which is that one drives a car but only has to maintain a motorcycle. This company manufactured the entire car itself. Its only suppliers were the engines, which were built in a separate part of the factory complex. The cars were very similar in appearance to the Trabant cars. At the end of production, the cars were parked in this giant parking lot next to the Eisenach plant. They were then loaded and shipped to communist countries or East Germany. In 1991, the factory was bought by Opel and production in Wartburg was discontinued.